Hello everyone, welcome to episode 9 of The Objective Hour. We've had a lot of guests in the past, mostly students, but today we're going to have perhaps the most special guest we've ever had, an actual professor in philosophy. And I believe you have a doctorate in philosophy and AI, or is that?
Not in philosophy and AI, that's not the doctorate.
Okay.
The doctorate is in technically history and philosophy of science.
I see.
It's a bit of a mouthful, but yeah, from University of Toronto, that's right.
I see, okay. I believe you texted me after seeing my reels, after I advertised it on Instagram.
Yeah, that's right. So I found your podcast through a very organic way, which was Instagram ads. So Instagram did its job, and I was just so intrigued by your podcast, and I thought this is wonderful, seeing younger generation wanting to start a podcast on philosophy, religion, ethics, politics related topics, and I just strongly support this kind of initiative. I think it's just really fantastic. And I listened to a couple of reels and I thought, this is really pretty high quality, pretty articulate, touching on some honest and difficult issues that people engage in. I mean, you guys have covered every topic from sex, dating, religion, metaphysics, ethics, core areas of philosophy, politics. Yeah, so I think it's fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you. It's really quite surprising to have a professor in philosophy and history, and what was it? Something sciences?
So my PhD, one more time, is in history and philosophy of science.
Oh, okay.
So it's mostly interested in social science, but my research is in the intersection of artificial intelligence, economics, and political philosophy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I had no idea that Instagram would actually pick people with that kind of interest to watch my ads, but yeah, it's very.
Me neither, but I'm really glad to be here, and looking forward to chatting.
Great. So last time we met in the restaurant, we talked a bit about. You asked me about my religion, and we explored different arguments for and against there being the existence of a God.
That's right.
And you told me to check the Miller array experiment.
That's right.
Yeah, and I went home and I read some of the papers that were and explained what it was. And I think it's pretty conclusive that I would accept that life can come from non-life. But then after I talked about this with one of my pastors, he also pointed out that in Genesis, apparently God created Adam with mud.
That's right.
Yeah.
Or from dust, more specifically.
Yeah. So, I guess, my faith in Christianity hasn't changed in that case, because I don't think it contradicts with biblical prophecies.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, but then it might contradict with the form of the cosmological argument that I used to believe was correct, but now less so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe because I'm not as familiar with the passage in Genesis, I'm familiar with what it literally says, but how do you interpret the idea that the creation of human beings came from dust? Because evolution doesn't say that.
Yeah.
Evolution says it's a much longer process from things that, metaphorically you can say are kind of like dust, but not literally. So in a certain sense it could be considered consistent, in another sense it's not consistent at all. And I would say actually most people who believe in Islam, Christianity, and Judaism strongly deny evolution. Pretty much any part of evolution they seem to deny. So I find it a bit surprising that you think it is consistent. So it really just depends on what you mean, right? So maybe you can tell me in what sense you think that is consistent.
I don't think there's enough evidence to. So regarding evolution, I think there are multiple ways to define it.
Sure.
I think obviously the mainstream Darwinist evolution is that humans, like all beings, have originated from single-celled organisms.
At least you can say we have a common ancestor.
Okay.
That's one way to put it, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I personally don't subscribe to that.
Okay.
I haven't done enough research in the area to know, perhaps enough about the arguments for and against it.
Okay.
But I believe that I won't say I would take Genesis literally, because I think some of it contradicts what we nowadays understand to be correct. Not just about evolution, but from the sixth day world creation, where apparently the Earth was created before the sun and the moon and the stars. I would accept evolution in the sense that humans have evolved physically, biologically, and socially, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that I believe that humans and all other animals originated from one single ancestor.
Yeah, that's understandable if you haven't studied any biology.
Okay.
But if you study some biology, it becomes very clear very quickly that there's overwhelming evidence. We share. You can just look at DNA analysis, right? You can look at literally all living beings.
Yes.
Trees, plants. You just go far enough back in the fossil record, and you just look at shared aspects of our DNA with these organisms. It's just very clear. It's just overwhelming. I'm not saying you have to believe me. I'm saying I encourage you to study more biology because it becomes pretty clear. It's hard to deny that.
Okay.
But you're within your rights to ask the question, and scientific theories, of course, can sometimes be false, especially throughout history. So, but this is one of the most confirmed theories for sure in the history of science, I would say. So I guess one question I might want to ask in response is, you mentioned the sixth day. So a day as defined in Hong Kong, most countries, except for the lunar calendar, is defined as a single rotation of the Earth on its axis. Now, they had a conception, of course, of this in the early Judaic periods, but they did not have a conception of this, let's say, 10,000 years ago. They didn't know that the Earth had these particular astronomical properties. So my question for you is why we should think that the Earth was created in 7 days when they didn't even have the concept at that time. Because dividing a week up into 7 days is coming much later in history than the time at which the Bible would have been kind of thinking through these kinds of problems. Not even the Bible, but the Bible itself. Put aside the Bible itself. The idea should have gone to the beginning of time, so to speak, right? But that's very much a human construct, and you can divide up time in different ways.
Yep.
You definitely don't need to divide it into 7 days. So why think that there's any truth to that claim?
I believe the common Christian justification is to say that a day doesn't mean the same thing as it does to us now.
Okay.
I think most Christians would say that a day means era or eon or whatever the term they define as.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Personally, I just take it as a metaphor because I don't think it makes sense.
Okay, interesting. So why not take the whole Bible as a metaphor?
Because I believe that certain parts of the Bible being testified for example, the New Testament in particular, I guess, was testified by Jesus' disciples. And the fact that Jesus lived, I think, is commonly understood as a historical fact.
I would agree that there was a person who was named Jesus who was born, a Galilean Jew, so to speak, in the region of contemporary Israel, Palestine, approximately. But I would not agree with most other things that people have claimed about Jesus, for sure.
Okay. So the reason I don't take the Bible entirely as a metaphor is because I believe that it is, for some parts of the Bible, there contains enough historical proof for for those events that makes me believe that it is logical to believe that it is true.
Okay, interesting. So, a few questions. First is, you mentioned testimony, testifying. So, have you by any chance observed a court of law in any country? Have you ever seen maybe a courtroom proceeding on television or on YouTube? Have you seen maybe some people testifying and they're lying?
I've seen, yes, I guess, yeah.
Or if they did not intend to lie, have you seen people testifying and what they're saying is just completely false?
No, but I can understand that does happen.
Right. So here's something maybe to consider, and I'm curious your thoughts on this. So consider that most of the world was pretty illiterate before the turn of the 20th century, turn of the 19th century, you can say. And you can say that even today people have a lot of false views. Off the top of my head, lots of people think that the Earth was created only 5,000 to 10,000 years ago. A lot of people think that COVID-19 can be cured by drinking a ton of alcohol. In Iran, a lot of people died tragically back in 2020 because of this.
Okay.
A lot of people think homeopathy can cure cancer. A lot of people think that quantum physics is somehow related to medicine. There's no direct connection between that. The 40% of American adults between the ages of 18 and 65 have no more than a 6th grade literacy. So my point is, if you just consider the historical circumstance in which the Bible and a lot of other religious documents are written and conceived of, you're talking a time that is so ignorant about pretty basic things. We didn't even have the germ theory of disease until about the 1870s or so. I mean, there are traces of it back in the 1600s, etc. So I guess in my opinion is that even if we assumed probabilistically that all these people are telling the truth, in the sense that as in they don't intend to deceive us, doesn't mean what they're saying is true. And if anything, it seems to me that actually if we just look at the history of a lot of belief systems, most belief systems that humans have offered are just completely false. I think physics really shows us this, right? I mean, Newtonian mechanics is not accurate of atomic phenomena at the smaller scale, for instance. It gives radically incorrect predictions.
Okay.
We can consider, the discovery of DNA in terms of its structure is only until the 1950s. We had the beginnings of vaccines in the 1790s, for instance. These are things that we take for granted today. Even our understanding of electricity is an 1800s era phenomenon, right? You had traces of it again in the 1700s, early 1800s. So to me, I just don't quite understand why we should take seriously pretty much anything people would say about things like this. There were smart people back then, for sure. You can consider mathematics, for example, as a field. Quite developed, even Aristotle, Plato's time, even before, right? So we're looking at 5th century BCE, for instance. And, they were able to build bridges, they're able to build buildings, able to build boats, able to build some basic mechanical weapons. We have the pulley, for instance. So I'm not saying people were categorically stupid. I'm just saying people were certainly very ignorant and very wrong about most things.
Okay.
So I guess, in my opinion, I'm just trying to, I just find it very puzzling that someone would assign any non-trivial probability to the accuracy of testimony.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So maybe you can help me to understand.
Okay. So, I think testimonies alone would not serve a very big purpose.
Agreed.
You just now mentioned that people can lie.
Yeah.
I would agree that the testimonies for Jesus Christ would be completely inaccurate given they weren't martyred.
Sure.
So, because of that reason, I think that there's at least very good reason to believe that they believed themselves. They believed that what they were testifying was true.
I don't know enough about that earlier history to comment, but let me just grant it for now. Let me just agree with you.
Okay.
Sure, yeah.
So, I think if people were to testify for something and die for it, then they would either be... Okay, let's say there are 3 possibilities. They were liars, they were insane, or they actually saw what they saw.
Okay.
So, I don't think people who are rational and
Can I
logical...
introduce a fourth possibility?
Sure,
You said
yes.
liars, insane, or what was the third one?
what they saw was actually true.
Oh, right, of course.
Yeah.
The fourth one is that it's none of those, but they were just ignorant and wrong.
Okay.
Instead of being insane, that's what I wanted.
Sure. Okay. Let's say they were lying.
Sure.
I don't think that them being rational and logical people that they would they would die for a lie.
Oh, okay, I see what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
Okay, I disagree with that, but that's okay. We
Okay.
can agree to disagree
Okay.
with that. Yeah.
I think it's possible.
Yeah.
I just think it's extremely unlikely that 6 people, and later on many more, would die for a lie. Die for something that they deliberately made up, not just something that they conceived to be true, even though it was a lie.
Right, but have you studied Japanese, German, or Chinese history?
Briefly,
You
yes.
think about the Nazis. A lot of people
Yeah.
died for a lie.
Mm-hmm.
You think about Japan.
Mm-hmm.
You think about Imperial Japan. A lot of
Okay.
people died for the emperor in the period of early 1900s, leading
Okay.
up to the end of World War II. A lot of people sacrificed their lives.
Okay.
30 million people, you can say, sacrificed their lives, at
Yeah.
least internationally, plus. So I'm surprised you find it implausible that someone could sacrifice their lives for a lie.
By people sacrificing their lives for a lie in Nazi Germany and Japan, what does that mean? Like, what was the lie?
So, I mean, there's quite a lot of lies. So, I mean, where to begin? Maybe I'm misunderstanding you, but one thought here is that a lot of people have, you can say, motivated thinking.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people want to believe certain things to be true that there may not be sufficient evidence to think it's true.
Okay.
I think a good example you can say is various forms of anti-Semitic thinking.
Okay.
So that means you can say hatred or the propagation of false beliefs
Mm-hmm.
or false views about Jewish people and their descendants. Obviously, in Nazi Germany, this was famously anti-Semitic. They propagated all kinds of false propagandistic views about Slavic people, about Russians, about British, about French. I mean, it's just kind of left, right, and center. Making a bunch of lies as a means to consolidate power in the Nazi Party in the early 1930s.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people died for that, namely all the soldiers in the armies.
Okay.
So, again, I'm not saying that the early period of Christianity was as extreme as this.
Mm-hmm.
No, it wasn't. But I'm saying that the idea that a person would die for something that they were motivated to think was true, but there wasn't good evidence for, is very high probability, in my view.
Okay. In that case, I would suggest that at the time there wasn't really a sort of social reason for them, a social motivation for them to lie, I guess.
So, let me put it this way. Let me grant that. So let me grant that they don't intend to deceive anyone. They might have still intended to deceive themselves. So
Okay.
I'll give you an example.
Sure.
A lot of countries that are particularly religious are actually quite poor.
Mm-hmm.
There are, of course, exceptions. The United States is a good example.
Mm-hmm.
So the United States is at least by GDP per capita, quite wealthy and very religious.
Mm-hmm.
But if you look at Indonesia, you look at Philippines, you look at Iran,
Mm-hmm.
you look at most of Latin America.
Mm-hmm.
So, there's many reasons for why these countries are religious. Obviously, there are historical and political factors that have led to the migration of Islamic thought out of the Middle East eastward into all the way to Indonesia, etc. But there is some evidence from economics. So I have a friend who did half a PhD in economics, then he left and did academic philosophy. And some of the research that he was sharing, looking at the case of Iran,
Mm-hmm.
is that actually the religiosity from surveys, you can say, to Shia Islam is somewhat positively correlated with how poorly the economy is doing.
Okay.
So you can say that there's at least some evidence in some places.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to say overwhelming evidence, but
Sure.
it seems like a hypothesis I'd like to believe could generalize that people are desperate for thinking a certain particular way, especially when times are difficult. And I think that if you look at a lot of people who convert to religion, whether it be Christianity, Islam, Judaism, not so much Judaism, but because typically people don't convert to Judaism, they're just born into it.
Mm-hmm.
Especially Islam and Christianity, a lot of those people are choosing to believe because they have a particularly difficult moment in their lives, right? Typically a tragedy of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're just looking for answers and maybe they didn't take a philosophy course in a way that could be taught in a secular context.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to finish my thought, and then you can jump in. My thought here is that I think a lot of people, if I was making $2 to $3 a day in Nigeria, or in Democratic Republic of Congo, like all of our cell phones have the coltan and tantalum and materials for the transistors. That's just mined by children in the Democratic Republic of Congo. These are really poor, sad, depressed, angry, upset people. If you had very little else to hope for, you would probably want to believe in religion because it's a way to comfort you, to make sense of your life, etc. And I think there's a lot of evidence of that.
Okay. If I don't know the New Testament as well as I probably should.
Okay. Neither do I.
I've heard that apparently the testimonies were very accurate, and they accurate in the sense that what someone testified did not contradict the other person, even though they wrote their testimonies independently and in different time periods.
Okay, yeah, it is true that the New Testament was written over a rather significant time period, and I don't know to what extent there's evidence that they've made similar specific claims, not just broad claims. Because if you make broad claims, it's very easy to confirm those with false positives. If I say, oh, you're going to be rich one day, but I don't tell you how rich, then if you end up making, let's say, I don't know, a six-figure salary, well, that's considered rich in poorer countries, maybe not in Hong Kong or something, but just to give you an example. So if they're making very broad or vague claims, then it's not impressive. But it is impressive if they're making very specific claims that are nonetheless identical across multiple independent witnesses. Maybe you can tell me what exactly some of these claims are.
I don't think they even technically I think the claims they were making were describing Jesus Christ as a person. So they were historical references of describing him as a person.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. So let's dig into this a bit. So there's different ways to describe people. You can talk about what their job was. I mean, as far as we know, Jesus was a carpenter. We can talk about what he kind of looked like. Probably looked like what we'd consider a modern-day Jew, in a certain sense. I mean, not that there's an exact stereotypical idea of what a Jew looks like, but I'm saying a person from that particular region, you can imagine. But then it becomes trickier, because then if you're going to talking about maybe walking on water or turning blood into wine, or you're parting the Red Sea and a number of these other things, those are not facts about Jesus. Those are claims about Jesus, but no one can defend the claim that that's historical. That requires a further argument one can say. I'm not saying you can't defend the claim at all. I'm just saying it wouldn't be reasonable to say that it's a historical claim. Right? So that's more of a metaphysical claim.
Okay, that makes sense. The problem is I'm not sure if this makes sense because it actually does, or if I'm just ignorant in the Bible. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah. So I do admit that there is a possibility that 6 people could lie about a testimony, and it could be. Another problem is that just now I talked about them being martyrs.
Okay.
There are also claims in the Bible that 500 people witnessed Jesus Christ appearing to them after his supposed death for a time period of 40 days.
Okay.
The problem I have with this claim is that I have not yet found extra biblical sources of this being true.
Have you found extra biblical sources for any of these claims?
I have found extra biblical sources for his disciples being martyred.
I think that would be well supported. I agree with that on that particular. You might ask yourself, why can't they just be wrong? I mean, people you know, a lot of people report ghosts. A lot of people say that their deceased grandmother visited them. Yeah, they're just wrong. It's just motivated thinking. And it's not that they're trying to lie to us, it's just they're wrong. And they wanted to believe that. I mean, I'm just finding it a bit difficult to understand why someone would believe this. I mean, people believe in all kinds of things that are just wrong. And but the kind of the appeal or the beauty of the idea itself motivates them so much to think it's true. So, I mean, like, think of it this way. Ask yourself, you know, do you see people coming back from the dead? Clearly no, right? Mm-hmm. In 2024, no one's coming back from the dead, right? Mm-hmm. So why think anyone could have ever come back from the dead 2024 years ago? You see where I'm going with this? Like it's just not true. I don't. Why think that?
So to, I guess, defend my view, I guess.
Yeah.
It's because I believe that Jesus Christ wasn't. I believe that if the Abrahamic God were to have existed, then he could change what was empirically, observably the law on earth.
That is a classic argument. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
And about your previous point about people believing in something more so because they want it to be true and less so because it is true.
Yep.
I have thought about this since our last meeting.
Okay. Yeah.
And
tell me what you think.
This is hard to say because a lot of people might see me as a devout Christian. But the truth is, I have started wondering if I'm a Christian because it is true, or I'm a Christian because I believe that the idea of people adhering to a set of moral laws that I agree with is more conducive to a better human life than not doing so. And for my personal case, I believe that. Of course, this is not saying that the Bible isn't accurate.
Sure, that's what.
But
yeah, no, I'm hearing you.
Yeah,
I'm listening to what you're saying,
personally, I think if I were to believe in a God, the Christian God, I would be a better person than if I were not to.
Okay, a lot of layers here, so let's work through this slowly. I understand what you're saying, and I think it's actually it's really wonderful actually that you're so honest with yourself about just trying to analyze this, right? I try to be honest with myself too. So you're exploring this idea that it is possible that maybe your reasons for believing it are actually more external to the religion, in the sense that maybe some of the claims themselves are false, but you find the appeal of the moral claims in the Bible, whether Old and or New Testament, as well as the general teachings of Christianity as practiced by contemporary pastors, appealing, and you think that maybe one way to follow those principles is to actually become a Christian. So, let me ask you this. So why not be a Christian but still practice those things anyways?
Because the reason for doing so would be less motivating for me.
So maybe you can tell me what is motivating about Christianity in particular as opposed to the alternative, which is not Christianity?
Personally, I find the belief in an all-powerful being who loves me as a very strong motivator to do good, because I do not want to upset someone who is powerful and loves me perfectly.
Well, that's interesting. Okay, I haven't heard of this idea before. So the idea of, like, it's almost like you're saying that you have a father figure who loves you and you don't want to disappoint your dad. It's pretty analogous what you just said, right?
I guess you could see it that way, yes.
So I guess I'm a little confused because why not just do things that you think are good because you think they're good? Isn't that more mature than having to be afraid of disappointing your dad? Because what you're saying, maybe you don't mean this, but I'm saying a consequence of what you're saying is that, well, what if God told you to do something else, and you didn't want to disappoint him, then you would do it, right?
It depends on what that thing is. It has to
Well,
align
it
with my.
shouldn't depend on what you think.
Yeah,
it
I
is.
understand.
That's not
I
being
understand.
Christian. That's not being religious. Being
No.
religious is you follow the religious laws
Yes.
morally, independent of whether you think they're good
Yes,
or not.
but the only
That's right.
yes, but the thing is, I would not be a Christian if God told, or at least in the Bible, the Abrahamic God told me to do something that I thought was morally wrong.
That's interesting. So have you looked at the book of Leviticus, passage 20:13?
I can't no, I don't know.
You sure? Where's your Bible? Let's pull it out.
It's on my iPad. Okay, well,
It's on your iPad?
Yeah.
That's okay, I'll tell you, I memorized it.
sure.
If a man lies with another man, that is, sleeps with, that is, have sex with, then
Mhm.
blood shall be spilt upon them.
Mhm.
I think it's pretty uncontroversial that that is asking for killing homosexual people.
Yes.
Presumably you don't want to do that,
No.
but why not? You should, because you are a Christian. And that's what the Bible says.
Because I believe that the judgment of someone's fate does not lie in my hands.
So, can you say a bit more? I'm not sure I understand, because that, again, it is a directive,
Mhm.
it is a moral claim, it's in the Old Testament very clearly. There's actually multiple passages in both the Old and New Testament that refer to what I would describe as like viciously homophobic content. Sorry, can you repeat what you said? You said it's not up to you to decide what the...
Okay, so I believe that objective morality exists.
Yeah, okay.
And so I believe that there are rights and wrongs in the world, and I believe that being a Christian means that you also subscribe to the moral teachings of Christianity, and even if the judgment that is derived from the wrath of God does not, it's not in line with your own moral judgment, that you should forego your own frustration about it and accept it, which contradicts with my own view that morality.
Yes, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to understand.
Yeah. That's interesting. Of course, I wouldn't want men. Well, I don't know what. Does it say men in Leviticus? Yeah. Okay, I wouldn't want homosexual men to die, of course,
Okay.
or in this case, be murdered.
That's right. There would
actually.
be murder. That's right. Yeah.
And I have read Leviticus before, so, and there are also more cases where I think it's unjustified if this is coming from, I guess I think there's something logically flawed in my reasons.
That's totally fine. I think the more you think about it, this is a very complex issue, and maybe more complex than you realize. And I think a lot of religious people who have not studied their own religion, they should spend more time to think through all of the logical consequences of what they believe. And I think that the more personally I try to study these religions, the less sense they make, the more inconsistencies I see, and the more probability that they're just all completely false. And I think that this becomes a lot clearer when you read the texts closely. I have not read the whole Old or New Testament. I would like to within my lifetime. I just got a lot of other stuff to do. I have read the entirety of the Quran, actually.
Okay.
Not in Arabic, but I've read it in English translations. Like a well-established English translation at that too. And I think when you look at these texts, they have, in some senses, good intentions. I will not say majority good intentions. I actually don't agree with that. But I think that, the charitable interpretation of what these religious texts are is they're part history, they're part life teachings, moral teachings, they're part fables and stories that are completely fictional but help people to make sense of their lives, especially in desert regions of the early birth of Christ period,
Yeah.
0 BCE or before. I mean, just factually, the large portions of the Bible are kind of inspired by the Epic of Gilgamesh. So, I mean, the Bible's not even really a new story. It's kind of an old, like, there's been variations of this before the Bible. The Bible's not really that impressive a text if you consider other kinds of things that have been written in that period. A lot of Christianity just borrows from other things that were happening at the time. And so, you know, the more I kind of study this, the more I think that there are very specific motivated reasoning factors that led people to join these particular groups. Obviously, there's the politics of Christianity in ancient Roman period, etc. There's so much happening in this time, right? The persecution of Jews in Egypt, etc. And so I think, you know, if we see these documents, like I try to charitably interpret these documents, say that the best way I can see it is really is just as I said. It is, some things are historical facts, some things are just made up fictional stories to help people make sense of their lives at the time. It's very pre-scientific, right? We didn't really have modern scientific thinking till, you could say, 11th, 12th century. Some people date experimental method until as late as the 1500s and 1600s. Excuse me. And the world's really confusing, right? I mean, even today, the world is confusing and difficult to deal with in 2024. And yet, anyone who has been formally educated in some capacity knows well more than anyone did 2,000 years ago. And so, that all being said, I think it becomes just really difficult to, for me personally, I'm just sharing with you my view, and I don't expect you to agree with me, but I just really find it hard to understand these books when you actually take the time, or you go meet the imam at the mosque, or you meet the pastor. I've spent a fair bit of time in churches. I was never raised religiously, but as a philosophy student who's quite passionate about philosophy and just thinking about the world, I'm like, I gotta go to church. I gotta go check out what's going on there, right? You gotta go see what's happening. And I ask some questions to the pastor, and they just don't give me clear answers. Or they sometimes do try to give me clear answers, especially the ones who are more educated in theology, maybe they're masters in theology. And I start asking questions, and then they start making logically inconsistent arguments pretty quickly. And so that's just been my personal experience, especially when you start sitting down with them and you really dig into it and start asking the questions I'm asking. And maybe I just haven't met the most educated ones, right? I have yet to meet, PhD level theologians or something. Well, I have a friend at HKU who's another professor and researcher of sorts in the philosophy department, and I talk to him a fair bit. He teaches me about Calvinism, for instance. But again, with due respect to him, I just have to honestly say his arguments don't make sense. So, he of course doesn't agree with me, but we have this ongoing debate or discussion, you can say. So anyways, I'll stop there, but I'm just trying to share with you that it's just something I struggle with. I still try to understand, and I just continually find myself not understanding.
Yeah, I was talking to, because yesterday I had dinner with some church friends, actually.
Nice. Good.
People who are much older than me.
Okay, good.
And I was talking to them. I was saying, I think that if I were to be a Christian and truly believe in what I was taught, then I have to pretty objectively say that I have the logical and intellectual high ground. I mean, Christianity has the logical and rational high ground above other religions.
That's right.
Otherwise, I cannot say that I am correct in being a Christian and that Muslims or Buddhists are wrong.
I agree with you. That is something you are committed to thinking. Which is a high and difficult task.
Yeah. And after 2,000 years of theological debate, if no one can come up with, let's not even say convince the whole world of Christianity, but come up with a definitive argument for Christianity, I cannot conceive that in my lifetime it will be possible. And I don't think that it is actually possible to convince or to even make an argument that Christianity is superior to other religions. What was I going to say next? So I think so after what me and two of my friends talked about, we agreed that either the threshold for proving Christianity is above human reason,
Mm.
or that there is no provable way to justify
Interesting.
Christianity.
So let me give you a counter view. Even though I'm not religious,
Mm-hmm.
even though I've expressed my views that are particularly critical of religions, I do think there are a lot of arguments. I just don't find them convincing, but a lot of professors of philosophy do find, well, no, I shouldn't say a lot, actually statistically few do, but there are still those who do. So the University of Notre Dame in South Bend, Indiana, this is in the United States, has a very strong department of philosophy,
Yeah.
and they have very famous philosophers of religion. Two in particular, Alvin Plantinga and Michael Ray. And they have spent a lot of their career defending the Christian faith in academic journals, in YouTube videos, in books, etc. I recommend you read their work. It's pretty high quality in the sense that they're trying to produce sophisticated arguments using logical, critical thinking skills to defend the Christian faith. There are others too. You can look at Department of Theology in Oxford. Actually, most universities will have a Department of Religion and or a School of Theology, and they will have professors who attempt to defend these views. I find all of these arguments completely unconvincing, but they have supporters, and so the term in the formal term is known as Christian apologist. It's not apology as in, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's not what it means. It means as in they're trying to defend their faith or their beliefs, so to speak, using argument, evidence, etc. And so I want to be encouraging to you that there are ways to try to do this, and there are very sophisticated ways to do this, that in my opinion meet a fairly high standard of intellectual and academic rigor.
Okay.
So if you're curious, happy to share and maybe email you or something some of those resources. So in that sense, I think, I ultimately think you're right that because I think it's ultimately not defensible, but there are a significant enough minority, it's certainly not majority, but minority of academic philosophers who do think it is defensible. And that humans can produce rational, compelling arguments for these things.
Okay. Well, that is encouraging somewhat. The problem, the fear, or maybe I should say, I have of going further down into theology is because when I, talk to an atheist or debate, like what we're doing now, it's how should I say this? I am usually unconvinced of Christianity. Or no, maybe I shouldn't say this. How should I put this? I think there are two possibilities of me not being convinced of the Christian arguments for the religion. Either they do not actually make logical sense, or I just believe that I do not know enough about theology.
I see.
If I go down this rabbit hole of looking further into theology, I don't know where I'll stop, because I will constantly think that I just don't know enough. That's like confirmation bias. Like I will constantly, if I truly devoted myself in believing something, let's say it was wrong, I will never in my lifetime believe it's wrong.
I see what you're trying to say.
Yeah. So at what point do I stop?
Yeah. I see what you're saying. It's a tricky question. Because you can also make the counter view to my own view. You might say, well, wait a second, Adrian, you decide to gamble on the view that I currently have, which is all religions are false. That's a big gamble. It's a huge gamble. Because you might say, well, Adrian, you could have just spent more time reading about religion and maybe one of those religions which maybe is true. You'd be missing out on that.
Yeah.
So you might say, Adrian, why did you make the gamble? So that's a great question. So I'll give you my answer. It's very straightforward. So let's think about at least the way I see it. You don't need to agree with me, but here's just the way I see it. Imagine you have a bunch of darts, okay? And you have a bunch of dartboards. So the dartboards are reality, and your dart is like a belief. So you're trying to make beliefs, true beliefs. To make a true belief, you're throwing a dart, and it successfully hits the dartboard. Sometimes we miss, right? So if I were to tell you what the temperature is right now, I don't know, maybe 31 degrees Celsius, I'm probably wrong. So I threw a belief and it missed the dartboard, so to speak. So the thought here is that if you consider religion, there are so many religions. You can be a Scientologist, you can be a Christian. Even within Christianity, there's like at least 100 plus different subsets of Christianity. Within Islam, there's at least 100 plus different variations in which one can be a Muslim. Shia, Sunni, even within Sunni, within Shia, there's tons of difference. Ismaili Muslim, Deobandi, Wahhabi, the list goes on. So you have all these different views, all these different beliefs. What is the probability that any of these beliefs got any of these things right when we, throughout most of human history, have gotten everything pretty much wrong? The probability is very low. Now, you might say, wait, doesn't that apply to my view too? Yeah, it does. But my view has less assumptions because I do not assume there's a God. I do not even assume that there's objective morality. That's actually something I don't believe. I don't assume that there's this Jesus guy who had particularly magical supernatural powers. So you can say the atheist assumption is a simpler, less committal assumption than is the assumption of religion. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
I would agree, but on the other hand, it also has a bigger cost if it were to be true.
Agreed. And that's why Pascal's wager has some force to it. Right? So the thought here is that, look, what if you're wrong? Oh, you're burning in hell for eternity, perhaps.
Yeah.
Or if not that, maybe worse. Who knows? Maybe I'm in purgatory, which is, to me, well, maybe not worse than hell, but in a certain sense, not good. But again, it's difficult to assess probabilities. I mean, there are so many other reasons why I don't believe in the truth of any of these religions. But without going into all of them right now, I mean, you have to ask yourself, like, how do you even know that you believe in Christianity? Because you think you do, but in order for you to think you believe in something, you need to be accurate that your belief you're forming is what you think it's of. I'll give you an example. I might think that I believe in South Africa as having a certain particular geographical boundary on its nation-state borders. But if you didn't know, South Africa has 2 countries within it. Did you know that?
No.
I see, that's what I'm saying. So most people, unless they think about a country, they think about something. And they have an initial conception of it, and they think that's right. And it's just totally wrong. There's Lesotho and Eswatini are 2 small landlocked countries within South Africa. So that shows you that when you had a belief about South Africa, you think that you're accurately believing this thing about South Africa, that this is what South Africa is, namely that it doesn't have 2 countries in it. It's completely wrong. There's 2 countries in it. So why not think that it's possible that even when you go to church, even when you read the Bible, even if you wanted to believe these things, how do you even know that that's the true? There's 2 questions. How do you know that that's true Christianity? And secondly, how do you even know that once you form that belief and throw that dart on the board, that's even about Christianity? What if you were just reading the wrong stuff your whole life? What if actually the true Christianity, all those documents, are really actually somewhere in Rome in some museum or something? You see what I'm saying? So the reason I think this is actually very probable is that if you talk to more Christians, and I've talked to a lot of Christians, they don't even agree on the same things about what Christianity is. So definitely, if they can't even agree, then at least one of them is wrong.
Yes.
In fact, probably they're all wrong about what Christianity is. So it's not even clear what the hell Christianity is. Excuse my language. So why think that you're believing in Christianity?
I guess the benchmark for being a Christian, as interpreted by most pastors, let's say, doesn't require everyone to believe in a single set of facts, but more so believing in one single fact, which is that Jesus Christ is our Lord and Savior.
Okay, Catholics would definitely disagree with that, but okay.
Yes.
And Catholics are at least 750 million people.
Yes.
That's a lot of people who disagree with that, but okay.
Yes.
What I'm trying to say is you've only learned one sect of Christianity that you've bought into.
What does that mean?
What I mean is that the Christianity that you were taught, maybe you can tell me more. I'm
Right.
You converted when you were in England, right?
I converted when I was in England, but the church in my school is Protestant. I don't see myself as being a Protestant. I actually go to a Baptist church, but I don't see myself as a Baptist.
Oh.
I'm a Unitarian Christian,
Okay.
but I'm not Unitarian as in I believe in the Unitarian denomination. I just merely accept the Unitarian Unitarian idea of the Abrahamic God, and everything else I derive from my own logical understanding. So it is perhaps almost definitely inaccurate from what. So basically, my understanding of Christianity is completely different from any form of denomination, any Christian denomination.
So what led you to believe in that, and why think that's the true one?
Because in my own limited human capabilities, that is the only path that makes logical sense to me.
Is it the only one that makes logical sense to you, or is it the only one that you were taught?
I was taught to not be a Unitarian, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, but I could not grasp the Trinitarian doctrine, so I decided that would be untrue.
I see. So no Catholicism for you, no Baptists for you.
Yes.
That makes sense. I see what you're saying. Maybe let's switch gears here. So let's take like maybe 20 steps back.
Okay.
So I guess the question about the Bible is always a difficult one. A lot of religious people, specifically Christians, like to go back to the Bible. They like to say, well, it says in the Bible. But a question that I have for you that I still struggle with is, why should I trust anything that the Bible says? Now, one response you gave is, well, there's extra biblical evidence that suggests that some things in the Bible are true. I actually agree with that. But only some things.
Mm-hmm.
So why think that more than those some things is true?
Because if they were right about Jesus Christ.
Well, I didn't say they. I don't trust the
Okay.
I don't trust the Gospels at all.
Okay.
Yeah, those are not the things I think are true. The things I think are true is that there are people named Abraham, Rebecca, Noah, Jesus Christ, Moses, and they existed in a particular time period, and they did approximately maybe a third of the things that they said they'd done.
Okay.
Namely things that are possible, namely like eating, drinking, walking, sleeping.
Okay.
Yeah, but nothing else is true.
So why do you believe in Abraham then?
Oh, that's a great question, because it's plausible. It's plausible that there is a person who did at least a third of the things that he did.
Mm-hmm.
That he basically that he had a son Isaac, that he had a delusional nightmare in which he took him to the top of the mountain and tried to kill him, which I think is one of the most awful things in the Bible, among many awful things. I actually don't even have extra biblical evidence to support that. I actually haven't even read it, so I don't even know if there is extra biblical. But I'm willing to believe that. I don't have strong probability that I was assigned to it, but yeah, I think there's probably a guy who did something like that. Why? So you might say, well, why do I think that? Well, because in my lifetime I've seen people do crazier stuff.
Okay.
I've heard of people do crazier stuff.
Okay.
So it's entirely possible. I mean, do I think he lived till age, I think, well over 90 is what this is in the Bible.
Yes.
No, of course not. It actually should be several hundred years. No, of
Yes.
course not. I think that either something got lost in translation, Aramaic, ancient Greek, or Latin, etc., or just totally false. So I think, I try to ask myself, because this is kind of all we all have, is we're just born into a time period, and we look around and we start developing beliefs about things that we see around us with sense evidence, etc. And I think to myself, okay, do people go around? Are they successfully able to do things like walk on water or part oceans? Nope. So that sounds like maybe it was metaphor, or maybe it's more beautiful than a metaphor. What's happening? Maybe it's like a nice bedtime story, right? That you tell your kids as a way to, especially if you're Jewish, and say, hey, we overcame so many issues in that historical region. That's the way I try to think about it. is that Jesus was not resurrected because no one comes back from the dead. It's just what people wanted to believe. Or maybe he wasn't actually dead. Maybe he actually, they were just wrong. They thought he was dead on the cross. But he just, he found his way. And that's stuff that happens. You know, people get shot like 50 times in wars, and people think they're dead. No, the guy's still alive. He wakes up 36 hours later, and it's very unlikely, but it does happen. Unlikely things do happen sometimes. And again, it's consistent with known laws of physics that a person could be shot and still live, right? It's consistent with a lot of what we know, that people could do various sorts of somewhat improbable things. But something like being resurrected from the dead is not consistent with anything we know from modern science.
Okay.
I mean, you gotta think about it this way, right? I mean, it's like, you imagine, like, you just random person off the street who's, like, never heard of religion, right? So I was basically like that growing up. My parents never told me anything about religion. I had to learn myself from friends and reading online, etc. Going to church. And so I'm coming from, like, ground zero, right? Just knowing nothing. And so imagine someone comes up to me and says, hey, you should believe in this Jesus Christ person. I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. Tell me about this guy. Oh, it's a guy who lived 2,024 years ago. I'm like, oh, that's a really long time ago. So what did he do? Oh, he did all these miracles. He was such a good guy. He had these good intentions. And he also was crucified on the cross. I'm like, well, that's really brutal. What did he do? It's like, oh, okay, well, the Romans had their reasons, etc. And later he was resurrected from the dead. And it's like, whoa, that's where I stop. It's like, wait a second, so can you say that again? They say, oh, resurrected from the dead. You say, well, you know, the first question I would ask as a teenager, or any, I think, reasonable person would ask, would be like, well, why, what do you mean? How can something come out from the dead? Now, there's many options. One option is that we don't fully understand laws of physics. Maybe it is possible biologically that people can come out from the dead. That's entirely possible. I grant that. By dead, if we define as your brain, you no longer have normal function with the brain or the heart. Well, it should be actually brain, but also heart. And but from what I know, that's impossible. Okay, so then someone might argue back and say, well, wait a second, Adrian. You grant that a lot of the history of science is the case where things that we thought were false ended up actually being possible, true. Fully granted. So you might say, well, why couldn't it be the case here? I said that even if it was the case here, that would be a natural and not a supernatural cause. So that would not produce any evidence that Jesus had superpowers or supernatural powers. If anything, it would just show that Jesus was a very surprising case of a medical phenomenon that is fully explainable in biological terms.
Sorry, why would it not show supernatural powers?
Because, as I said, by hypothesis, if we suppose current biology is not complete, which it's not, we don't understand anything about biology. Maybe it is a case, because occasionally sometimes you have things happen only once or twice.
Okay.
One example is a man, Phineas Gage, I forget if it was England or the US, and he had a metal rod shoved through his head as a result of a construction site accident. Mm-hmm. Most people die, but he is the one person who didn't die. And it's a well-known case in psychology because it allowed him to survive, but his memory, I think, and also some of his anger issues and personality changed significantly. So, again, that's a very improbable event, but it can be fully explained in natural causes. So suppose that it were the case that Jesus, so to speak, came back from the dead, and suppose that from all we know that that's not possible, well, maybe some future biology 30 years from now will find out, actually, no, there is a certain way to do it. Here's the mechanism. Even if we found that out, that wouldn't show that he had supernatural powers. That would show he was just naturally doing things as biology does. You understand?
But suppose there is a God, and that God was in fact all powerful and omnipotent and whatever. Then if a person was morally good and was doing the acts that this God desired, and he knew what that God desired, then and the God was able to give, if the God was able to let a human being do things that other human beings on Earth would empirically not be able to do, because of
what you're trying to say,
then that would be possible. Like it's
I hear what you're trying to say, but as we discussed previously, and maybe we can switch to that topic if you want, no pressure, I don't believe God is possible.
Okay. But the thing is, something that isn't possible by a posterior logic doesn't mean it's not possible by a priori logic.
No, I don't think it's possible by a priori logic. Like I said, omniscience is not a consistent property.
Okay. So we talked about the problem of ignorance.
Mm-hmm.
What if there wasn't a claim that God could understand us, in the sense that he could understand how we feel when we're ignorant?
So then we define God as not having omniscience. He only has omnipotence and omnibenevolence.
No. If he had omniscience, but that he couldn't feel what we felt.
Then I don't understand why we would believe such a being even exists that had even... I don't even think... well, let me make this clear.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anything I don't think anything anywhere close to a God exists. Like, not even close. So if you just remove, like, a couple exceptions, that doesn't do it for me. This is completely implausible. I'm not trying to say. I mean, but let me answer your question, which is a more sophisticated question that I think you're trying to ask, which is, I think it's possible. It would be consistent to have a well-knowing but not all-knowing being. I see no contradiction there. That's possible, but I don't even think that thing exists.
I don't understand, because are you trying to say that an all-knowing being would also know how we feel?
No, I'm saying an all-knowing being is not possible. It doesn't make any sense.
Why not?
For the reason that we discussed last time, which is that if you assumed, it's just standard proof by contradiction in math, right, or in logic. You just assume something, and you show that that particular assumption leads to an inconsistency, so then you reject your initial assumption. So if we assume that there's an all-knowing being, okay, great. Then that being should be able to know what it's like to be Tom and Adrian. Because they know everything, right? And it is, third premise, Tom and Adrian are ignorant of many things. I have no idea what the time is right now in Bangkok. I have no idea what the mass of the sum of you and I's weight is. Tons of stuff I don't know. Fourth premise, it's an essential feature of our mode of being as human beings that we don't know tons of stuff. We'd be a different kind of animal if we were somehow able to know everything or something like this. So then by God's, the assumption of omniscience that I started with, he should be able to know what it's like to be ignorant, but that just is straightforward contradiction. Because God can't know what it's like to be ignorant, he knows by assumption everything. But there is something it is like to know what it's like to be ignorant, because you and I are ignorant, we're feeling it all the time. But that's not something God could ever know, that's only something you and I can know. So then there's at least one thing God can't know, therefore God doesn't exist. Because omniscience is not a consistent property.
I'm interested to hear a more professional refutation of this, because I have no refutation.
I can try to give you a couple counter attempted arguments against my view. So one thought is that there's nothing it is like to feel ignorant. That argument makes no sense to me. I mean, one fellow professor tried to make this argument to me. I don't understand.
Well,
I feel ignorant all the time. You and I feel we're ignorant. I have no idea how many people are in this office right now. That's a feeling, I'm having it, it's true. So that argument doesn't make sense.
I don't think I even understand what he's trying to say.
What he's trying to say, he's trying to deny one of my assumptions. Namely that there's something it is like to be ignorant.
There's something it is like to be ignorant.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
There's a feeling of ignorance.
Oh, okay.
But I don't understand why he thinks that. I mean, I'm ignorant, you're ignorant.
Yeah.
There's tons of stuff I don't know, right? Yeah. So that doesn't make sense. Another argument is to say that God could temporarily be ignorant and then retrieve his omniscience back later.
Sure.
That begs the question, how could he temporarily be ignorant?
Yes, I agree.
That's straightforward logical inconsistency. Okay, so you agree that argument doesn't make sense.
Yes.
Another attempt is to say that okay, here's a sophisticated one. So one of my ex-girlfriends, who is now a computer scientist, received a PhD in computer science, very smart person, made the following objection. It's not a positive property, being ignorant. So this goes back to a classical Aristotelian, sorry, not Aristotelian, Aquinian, although it might also be Aristotelian actually. So this is kind of a medieval argument. So an argument that was made a lot by the medievals say that, sorry, not a lot by medievals, at least Aquinas I think said this, St. Thomas Aquinas. Only positive properties exist. Negative properties don't exist. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean positive as in like good. No, that's not what it's meant. What it means is that like I have a hand, but I don't have like a space between these two fingers. Like there are no absences. There are only things that exist. There's not things that don't exist. So there's a distinction between an absence of a positive property versus the existence of an absence of something. So the claim is that there are no existing absences. There are only absences of things that exist. So that's a weird way to phrase things, but the idea is that there's no such thing as a negative property. There are no such properties for which there can be there's no subtraction in nature. All there is just the missing of a plus. Think of it that way. That's what Aquinas thought. Now, if that's true, then my argument doesn't work. Why? Because I said there are such things as being ignorant. There is such a thing as what it's like to not know things. But according to someone like, well, I believe Aquinas, and or someone who believes only in positive properties, there's simply the absence of a positive property in this case, namely the absence of the positive property of knowing things.
Okay.
Which is different than saying, I have ignorance. No, you don't have ignorance. You lack knowledge.
Okay.
You see the distinction?
Yes.
So that's the distinction that has been made. That's a very sophisticated objection to my view. I don't agree with that. Because God would have to lack certain kinds of knowledge to know what it is like to lack certain kinds of knowledge. So even if we assume that there are only positive properties in the entire universe, that this argument also doesn't work, because anyone who denies the existence of negative properties still accepts that there can be, but not exist, there can be the absence of positive properties. Does that make sense? Think of it this way. There are no stupid people. There are only not intelligent people.
Okay.
That's what Aquinas thinks. There are no short people. There are only the lack of tallness in these people.
Yeah, I understand the logic. I'm still trying to wrap my head around how that logic disproves the theory that the omniscient nature of God can
the idea is that there will be no such thing as what it's like to be ignorant, because that is the positing of a negative property.
Okay.
Which is what I'm committed to.
Okay.
But I say that, so here's a counter to the counter argument. I don't agree that argument defends the argument.
Okay.
Because suppose there are only positive properties. Suppose that what ignorance is not a positive state. It's actually the absence of a state, namely the absence of knowing. But then God would have to have an absence of knowing to know what it's like to lack.
I see what you
You see what I'm saying? So that doesn't save the argument at all. Now, okay, so we can keep going. So I had another colleague make another argument. He said, what if, for example, human logic is actually not the bounds of logic? In other words, what if actually you used a paraconsistent logic? What if you used a contradiction-tolerant logic that can coherently reason about inconsistent properties, and maybe God is inconsistent?
Wait, so I don't understand what a contradiction...
So the idea is, so now we need to go back to basic logic. So the more philosophy you study, especially if you study more advanced philosophy and advanced mathematics, you'll actually see that there's actually multiple logical systems. There's not just one. There's hundreds of them. And there's actually reasons to deny classical logic. Like, for example, I don't believe in classical logic. I think classical logic is ridiculous.
What is classical logic?
Classical logic says that there can be no contradictions. Classical logic says that if... it basically is the logic used by computers,
okay.
Which is be roughly described as like and, or, negation, if, then. These are the four primary logical connectives that are used to formalize all true functional propositions and, or the basic circuitry of low and high voltage transistors, etc. This is obviously, I don't think that that's false in the sense that I deny the practical utility of Boolean circuitry for computers. I don't know. Obviously, that's the case. I'm just saying that as a general mode of inference a priori for mathematics and reasoning, I think it's ridiculous. So you might say, why? Well, this is very technical, so I'll try to make it simple, especially for our audience here. But so let's start with this. Why do we think contradictions are bad? You might say, well, one argument for why inconsistencies or contradictions seem to be bad is they don't seem to make sense. So you might say, imagine if I just walked up to you, Tom, and said, hey, Tom, guess what? It's both raining and not raining outside. You're like, what do you mean, Adrian? You just said it's raining, but it's also not raining. That seems to negate each other. It seems like that doesn't make any sense. And suppose that I'm also saying that it's both raining and not raining in the same place. So it's not like it's just raining in some part of Hong Kong and not raining. No, that's not what I'm saying. Raining and not raining. Somebody said that doesn't make sense. I say, you know what? Granted, that doesn't make sense. What if I said this? What if I said, consider the following sentence. This sentence is not true. So this sentence talks about itself that it's not true. Now you might say, Adrian, come on, what's with this? What's with the riddle? What's with the puzzle, right? Well, think it through. If this sentence is true, then it's not true. Oh, but if it's not true, then it's accurately reporting about itself that it's not true. Therefore, it's true.
I see.
So that's an example of a true contradiction. That's an example of a contradiction that makes sense, and it's inconsistent. So you can have inconsistent things that make sense. Okay, so let's start with that.
Yep.
Second thing is, so the professor of philosophy, Graham Priest, at the City University of New York, incredibly gifted, smart philosopher, professional philosopher, he has defended throughout his career inconsistent reasoning of a certain kind. He's also a very good mathematician. So he did his PhD in mathematics at London School of Economics before he became a professor of philosophy. And if you look at his work, it's just absolutely brilliant. He was the one who convinced me when I started reading his work. I was like, what can I see? I actually should think that some contradictions are not a problem at all. In fact, this is relevant to Christianity. Nicholas de Sousa, or Cusa, I can't really pronounce Latin, but I think it's 14th, 13th century. You can look it up on Wikipedia or any other academic source. He actually thought that God was inconsistent. So he thought that God existed, and he had inconsistent properties, and that also explained why we couldn't have knowledge of God. Because God doesn't obey human logic. He obeys some other super God-like logic. And so he's able to do things that we can't, not only can we not understand, but he seemed to have additional reasons for which I forget right now, for why we should think God is an inconsistent entity. Probably for some of the reasons that I'm objecting to, namely that omniscience or omnipotence seems to lead to paradoxes.
But how can anyone believe that God abides by, something that's superior to human logic if we cannot even logically understand it?
I totally agree with you. That's why I think he's totally wrong. So that's an example of an inconsistent thing that I don't think exists. So most things that are inconsistent, well, I can't even talk, well, you can talk about inconsistent things, but they don't exist, right? So like a circular square, I didn't even really speak English properly when I said that, you know what I'm saying? So I think all religious people don't speak English or any language properly when they speak of God. They don't know what they're talking about. That's my current view. It's similar to saying circular squares.
I see.
Yeah.
Let me just check. Okay. So is there any? So is the this sentence is false thing part of classical logic or not?
It is not part of classical logic per se. I mean, it's just a claim because the sentence is claiming about itself that it's false.
Yeah.
To answer your question, what you mean to ask is this something for which classical logic cannot address adequately? Yes, it cannot. Okay. Because if you use classical logic, I didn't explain why. So the reason is because in classical logic, there's only true truth values. Things are either true or they're false. Now you might say, well, why can't you have true and false in classical logic? Because if you have a contradiction, then you can actually show that any proposition follows from inconsistent propositions. So this is where things get a bit more technical. Let me explain. I'll give you the argument. Suppose it's raining and not raining. Great, first premise. Second premise, it's raining just by itself as a claim. And that follows from the first premise. Because if it's raining and not raining, then clearly it's raining understood as a claim unto its own, right? Third premise, also from the first, it's not raining. Fourth premise, either it is raining, which comes from the second premise, or Adrian is made entirely out of cheese, something that's false. So I didn't say Adrian's made out of cheese. I said either it's raining or Adrian's made out of cheese. Because the semantics of an or claim is true if and only if at least one of the or claims is true. So this is called an inclusive disjunction in linguistics.
Okay.
And that's very intuitive because if I told you that either your name is Tom or your parents are from Thailand, that's true because your name is Tom. I didn't say and you're from Thailand. I said or you're from Thailand. You see the difference? So an or claim is a weaker claim. It's just at least one of those things is true.
What if my parents are from Thailand?
That's fine. Then the or claim is still true. So an inclusive or claim has the semantics where if both things are true, it's still also true. But all it requires is at least one of those claims is true. Whereas an and claim, when you say X and Y, they both have to be true. So it's a stronger condition. This is just intro math, intro logic, intro computer science.
But that sounds like more like a problem of how you define the word or than...
You can put it that way, fair enough. Other languages might have a exclusive disjunction. I mean, English does also have an exclusive disjunction usage. So for example, you say to a kid, you can have either marshmallows today or the Mars bar. You can't have them both. So that's a good example of a natural language usage of an exclusive or as opposed to an inclusive or claim.
I see.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, using inclusive or here. Now, as we said, first premise, raining and not raining. Second premise, raining. Third premise, not raining. All of those second and third premises come from the first premise. Mm-hmm. Fourth premise, either it's raining or Adrian's made out of cheese.
Yes.
So I haven't got to the interesting part.
Yeah.
Here's the interesting part. Adrian's made of cheese. Now you might say, whoa, where'd you get that from? Well, that actually follows from premises 2 and 4. No, sorry, 3 and 4. Why? Because in classical logic, I just said that either it's raining or I'm made out of cheese. But the third premise is that it's not raining. And that comes from the second conjunct of the two conjunctions.
But how could that be true?
Well, because the first premise is both true and false. You have to remember that it's both raining and not raining, by assumption, right?
I think this is getting a bit beyond my understanding.
What I'm trying to say is, no, it's within your understanding.
Yeah, but
this is trying to show you that contradictions don't make sense. That's the whole point. So I'll say it one more time. Assume it's raining and not raining. Suppose it's X and not X, right? X on its own is the second premise. Not X on its own is the third premise. Either X or Y, for some just random Y claim. For effect, make sure it's false. So namely, Adrian's made out of cheese. We said from premise 3, not X. And we said that from premise 4, that either X or Y. So we have not X, so therefore this X has to be false. That means the other Y thing must be true, because the semantics of the or is at least one of those two things is true.
Wait, sorry, I don't... So X isn't true, so
correct.
Y has to...
Yes, so Y has to be true.
So X isn't true, so not X can't be true.
Only in this case, because we assume that there's a contradiction. And this is why this is part of the philosophical exercise, is to get you to see that if you accept contradictions, you have to believe nonsense, because we agree this conclusion is not. We agree the conclusion is nonsense, but the argument is what you call valid, because if those premises are all true, then surely the conclusion is true.
But okay.
But the premises just happen to be false. In fact, incredibly false.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Does that kind of make sense?
I get the chain of reasoning, but I don't think it makes sense.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So I agree with you. I also understand the chain of reasoning, but the conclusion is clearly false. And that's why I'm giving you an argument for why classical logic can't deal with contradictions. Mm-hmm. Because if classical logic is given inconsistent information, it just spews out nonsense. It cannot reason with inconsistent information. That's why Canadian, Belgian, Australian, Brazilian logicians since the 1950s have developed paraconsistent logic, contradiction-tolerant reasoning that can have inconsistent data as input and still produce meaningful information.
Okay.
But that's more complicated
Okay.
today.
I think it's probably about time now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
But
Awesome.
I think I'm gonna have to watch this video back like a few times just to understand
Oh, no worries.
concretely.
That's okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Totally fine.
Yeah, but it's been great having you on.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's probably been one of the most entertaining episodes for some philosophy.
I had a lot of fun too.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, is there anything you want to say before?
I just want to thank Tom so much for inviting me. This is really awesome initiative, what you're doing. I strongly encourage you to keep doing this. Invite people from all kinds of backgrounds. I wouldn't be surprised if another professor of philosophy in Hong Kong would love to participate. No pressure, but if you are curious, I know at least one person who would probably participate.
Sure.
And they'll give you maybe a different perspective than me on any of these topics. And yeah, so I would say that. And just a reminder to the audience, because I actually didn't introduce myself. My name is Adrian. I'm a professor of philosophy at the Department of Philosophy at Lingnan University here in Hong Kong. I've been a professor only for 1 year. I'm from Canada, and I'm really interested in all areas of philosophy, so happy to talk more. If anyone wants to email me, you're welcome to email me. And yeah, thanks again, Tom, for having me on the show.
Great, no problems.
Appreciate
It's
that.
been a
Cheers.
pleasure for me too. Thanks for watching today's episode of The Objective Hour. For more content, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bells. See you next time. Oh, and follow me on Instagram, @The Objective Hour. See ya.